Thank you for listening to American Medicine Today. I am Kimberly Bonatti alongside Ethan Euchre and Jeff Wagstaff. Now, we're very excited to speak with our next guest. He's a veteran journalist and anchor of Fox News Sunday, and his new book, Countdown 1945, details the extraordinary story of the atomic bomb and the 116 days that changed the world. Thank you for being with us, Chris.
Well, good to be with you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Now, Chris, before we get into the book, which it sounds absolutely fascinating, and I've seen a lot of the press that you've been doing about it. But before we get into that, we have to talk about the craziness in the world right now, you know, from the COVID pandemic to the protests to defunding the police. Where do we start here? Give us your thoughts on what's happening in the country right now.
One of the things that I enjoyed the most about researching and then writing Countdown 1945 is the unity in the country, the sense of common purpose. There were 125,000 people involved in the Manhattan Project for 2 years, and it never leaked. Today, you could have 125,000 people involved in a project to bake apple pie, and by day one, somebody would be tweeting how outrageous this was, and they were going to be a whistleblower. So it was a simpler, more innocent, more unified time, and boy, could we use that now.
Well, Mr. Wallace, with President Trump, I mean, why do you feel the temperature of the country is anti-Trump? Because people that I'm speaking to, they enjoy his love of America and trying to do right by its citizens by making the country great again. Why do you think he's such a polarizing figure?
First of all, it's a 50-50 nation, Kimberly, and you can have millions of people. You're quite right. He's beloved. The Trump base will walk through fire for this man, and they think he's really done a lot to improve America. And there are a lot of people who feel the opposite. And it really does seem since the year 2000, with the Bush-Gore election, that this country is just about split down the middle. That's where we are. It's almost like we've become tribes. It's a variety of things, but the tribe you're in says a lot about your view of the world, your view of government and its relationship to the individual, your view of faith, your view on social issues, and your view on the media, and what you consume and what you don't consume, and also what you're against. And that just is the nation we're in today.
And what do you think the temperature will be around the 2020 election?
It'll be 50-50. It'll be close. This is going to be a close election. I think that either one of these men can win. It usually ends up coming down to about 5 or 6 states and probably about 5 to 10% of the electorate. And 90% of the electorate, 45% each, is locked in stone, and there's nothing going to change. And there's probably 10% of the electorate, and they'll swing it. And they swung it towards Donald Trump in 2016, and who knows who they'll swing it to in 2020.
Chris, you've seen a lot as your time as a reporter, and the country is definitely not unified. From your perspective, what do you think can unify the country?
I'm not sure that anything can right now. I do think that we need to take down the temperature a bit. I think both sides are guilty of this, of demonizing the other. And again, to go back to Countdown 1945, people had differences of opinion, but they felt they were all on the same side, and they felt they were all working to the same end. It was a big issue in 1945 in the president's cabinet. Should they drop the bomb? Should they invade Japan? President Truman. But today, nobody sort of ascribes good faith to the other side. They think the other side is not only wrong, but somehow bad. You can't have a sensible debate if you think the other side is bad.
Correct. Yeah. And Chris, let's jump into the book. What made you want to write a book about those 116 days leading up to the atomic bomb?
Well, I wanted to find an event, a major event, and that with a lot of drama and a lot of tension, and you didn't know what was going to happen. And my favorite review, the Washington Post, said, I know what happened in 1945, but this book reads like a thriller. And there's so many moments in it. Truman trying to decide, am I going to drop the bomb or invade Japan? The scientists at Los Alamos, who didn't know whether what they called the gadget would even work until mid-July, 21 days before they actually dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. And then the flight crew of the Enola Gay, the plane that went to Hiroshima, because there never had been an atom bomb dropped out of an airplane, had no idea whether when they dropped it, the shockwaves would knock them right out of the sky. So there's a real drama, and we cover it from almost every angle. The politicians, the scientists, the military, the home front, a little 10-year-old girl who's on the ground in Hiroshima At certain points writing it, it almost felt like a screenplay where in the bottom left-hand corner they go, Potsdam, Germany, and they Los Alamos, New Mexico. So I really think that it's a good ride, and that's what I wanted to provide people.
I wanted to ask you about that, actually, Chris. You mentioned the girl who was 10 years old at the time in Hiroshima at Ground Zero. She's still alive today and lives in the States, right? Did you interview her for this book?
I did, and then I also interviewed her for a documentary that is on Fox Nation, and her name is Hideko Tamura. She was 10 years old. Again, here's an example of how dramatic the story is and how the truth is stranger than fiction. She is sent, like a lot of the children were, out of Hiroshima because her parents were worried that the city was going to be bombed, just regular conventional bombings, and she goes to a school out in the countryside, but it turns out it's more of a work camp. So she sends a letter to her mother and says, please come rescue me. And her mother comes and rescues her and says, I'm going to take you home, but let's spend a couple of days out here in the country. And Hideko says, who's just 10, but very willful, says, no, I want to go home. And so they go home, and it turns out to be August 5th. And, of course, the bomb is dropped the next day. If she'd stayed out in the countryside, they would have escaped the bombing. And the mother is killed, but the little girl survives and saves herself. Her mother had sort of drilled into her how to protect herself in case of an explosion, just a normal conventional bomb. And she followed her mother's instructions and saved herself. And she now is in her mid-80s, lives in the United States, married an American, has children and grandchildren, and came to Washington. What did she want to do? She wanted to see the Enola Gay, which is at the Air and Space Museum. So we took her out there to see it.
And it was also interesting. I think there was a quote from Einstein that said it turned out to be one of the worst mistakes of his life to have been wanting the atomic bomb to begin with.
It was interesting. The politicians never had second thoughts, at least that they admitted. The flight crew never had second thoughts. The scientists did. And the whole project kind of started in 1939 when Einstein wrote a letter to FDR, and they were terribly concerned, a lot of the scientists who were German refugees, they were terribly concerned that the Nazis were going to get a hold of the atomic bomb before the West did, the Allies did, and of course terrified about what Adolf Hitler would do with an atom bomb. So he encouraged them to do it. And then after the war in 1954, just shortly before he died, Einstein said, this was the one big mistake in my life. I wish I had never done this, which to a certain degree is unrealistic, because even if it hadn't happened then on the basis of Einstein writing Roosevelt, at some point, some country was going to discover nuclear energy and nuclear power, and that you could create an atom bomb.
Thank you so much for being on. We'd love to talk to you further. Veteran journalist and anchor of Fox News Sunday, Chris Wallace, about his new book, Countdown 1945, which details the extraordinary story of the atomic bomb and the 116 days that changed the world. Thank you for being on the show.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, guys.
Well, that wraps up this edition of American Medicine Today. Make sure you check us out again next week.